establishment, we have the Deputy Director for Fire Safety Enforcement Group of the Bureau of Fire Protection, Fire Superintendent GARRY D. Lunas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Superintendent GARRY D. Lunas. I am the Deputy Director of the Fire Safety Enforcement Group of the Bureau of Fire Protection. The topic that is assigned to me now is the revised implementing rules and regulations of the Fire Code of the Philippines, or Republic Act 9514. As you all know, the 2009 IRR of the Fire Code was revised last 2019, or 10 years after its implementation. Throughout these past 10 years, several issues have to be resolved by the Bureau of Fire Protection that necessitated the amendment of the IRR. So today, I will be sharing to you some of the most important provision that applies to general establishments. The objectives of our session for today are the following. Number one, for you to be able to enumerate some of the most important general requirements on various establishments. And number two, for you to be able to determine the required fees and fines in the application of the required certificate and clearances from the Bureau of Fire Protection. Before I will go to the most important provisions that applies to general establishments, let me first emphasize this preliminary information. The first one is on coverage of the Fire Code of the Philippines. The Fire Code applies to all persons, either natural or juridical, and it also applies on all buildings, facilities, or structures in their premises constructed before and after the effectivity of the law. Considering that the law has a retroactive effect, buildings, structures, or facilities constructed before the passing and implementation of this law must still comply. Another very important information that I'd like to share with you is on the authority to enforce and administer the Fire Code of the Philippines. You know, under the law, it is the BFP which has the authority to enforce and administer the Fire Code of the Philippines, and not any other agencies or entities of the government. And to both said assertion, the newly passed BFP Modernization Law, or Republic Act 11589, further enhanced and clarified this mandate. Now, let me now go to the general requirements on buildings and establishments. Let us start from the requirement of a company fire brigade under Section 6021. The revised IRR requires that business establishments that can accommodate at least 50 persons shall establish and maintain its own fire brigade to deal with fire and other emergencies within its premises. This is, of course, in addition to the fire safety requirements in the premises before a fire safety inspection certificate may be issued by the fire marshal having jurisdiction. A certificate of competency is also a requirement for fire volunteers, fire volunteer organizations, and fire safety practitioners before they engage themselves as fire volunteers or as designers, contractors, or those even involved in the upkeep of fire safety systems. Currently, however, the COC for fire safety practitioners is still on hold due to the pending guidelines for its issuance. We also now have institutionalized the requirement that fire safety evaluation clearance is a prerequisite for the issuance of a building permit by the Office of the Building Official. Therefore, any building permit issued without the required EPSEC is null and void. However, this must be consistent with the provisions of the National Building Code, which provides that the fire marshal has to act within 5 days from the endorsement of the building official. Failure on the part of the fire marshal to act within the period specified, then the building official is now justified to issue a building permit even without the fire safety evaluation clearance. The BFP also again requires the submission of fire safety reports as a condition before a fire safety evaluation clearance or a fire safety inspection certificate may be issued. If you recall, the submission of Fire and Life Safety Assessment Report or FALAR was removed by then Secretary Robredo of DILG. But because of the many fire incidents that were proven to be caused by poor maintenance and inadequate compliance of the required fire safety systems or fire safety requirements, the BFP deemed it proper to require again the submission of a well-documented fire safety reports. These are now called Fire Safety Compliance Report, which is a requirement for fire safety evaluation clearance, Fire Safety Compliance and Commissioning Report, which is a requirement in the application for Fire Safety Inspection Certificate for occupancy, and the Fire Safety Maintenance Report, which is a requirement for application for business operation, which is annual. Which buildings are now required to submit these reports? All buildings that are required to install wet standpipe system, automatic fire suppression system, and automatic fire detection and alarm system are required to submit these reports, number one, during application for fire safety evaluation clearance, in which is in this case you have to submit the fire safety compliance report. Then you are going to submit fire safety compliance and commissioning report in the application for fire safety air safety inspection certificate for occupancy when the building is already finished and will now be applied for occupancy. And lastly, fire safety maintenance report when securing FSIC for business operation. That means you're going to submit this fire safety maintenance report annually to the Bureau of Fire Protection as a requirement for your fire safety inspection certificate. Currently, however, only the submission of the fire safety maintenance report is required due to the pending guidelines for the issuance of COC for fire safety practitioners who are the only authorized signatory of these reports. For the fire safety maintenance report required now, the building administrator or manager may sign the report for the meantime. Again, only fire safety practitioners issued with certificate of competency are allowed to prepare, sign, and certify the fire safety compliance report, fire safety compliance and commissioning report, and the fire safety maintenance report. Let us now go to the requirement on fire safety clearances. Aside from the fire safety inspection certificate, which is a requirement for occupancy and for business operation, the fire code also requires that fire safety clearances be secured for the storage, handling, and transportation of hazardous materials and hazardous operations and processes. Also, fire safety clearances are required for the installation of fire safety and warning system and building service equipment. However, for those that are included already in the application for fire safety evaluation clearance as a requirement for the building permit, you do not have to apply for an independent fire safety clearance. However, for a standalone application, which means These are the applications that are after the building have been issued with certificate of occupancy. Say, for example, replacement or maintenance or upgrading, then you have to apply for a separate fire safety clearance, which is called an standalone fire safety clearance. The fire code also now requires the mandatory posting of emergency evacuation plan. In the old implementing rules and regulations, only places of assembly buildings are required to post. Now, under Section 10 to 513 of the revised implementing rules and regulations, all buildings are now required to post emergency evacuation plans on conspicuous locations within the premises of the building. And the basic informations that are enumerated therein are the required information that must be present in your emergency evacuation plan. Also, there are dimensions required depending on the floor area of your establishment or your building. So, enumerated in the slides are the dimensions required based on areas. Okay. Now, for fire detection, alarm, and communication systems under Section 10266, please be informed that we now recognize the Philippine Electronics Code as additional standard in the design and installation of our fire alarm system. That is in addition to NFPA 72, which is the usual reference of the fire code of the Philippines. So currently, we are now recognizing the Philippine Electronics Codes as an additional reference in the design. Now, on automatic sprinklers, we also have added NFPA 13R. Originally, we only consider NFPA 13 or the standard for the installation of sprinkler system to be the sole standard for the installation of sprinkler system. But currently, we now recognize NFPA 13R for low-rise residential occupancies. That means you may use NFPA 13R for buildings that are 4 stories and below. Now, for standpipe system, we recognize NFPA 14 as the standard for the installation of standpipe system. And as an additional information, we now only require wet standpipe system. We have removed the requirement for a dry pipe system in the Philippines. Now, another very important requirement is the institutionalization of the requirement for smoke control system on high-rise buildings, smoke refuge areas, atrium of covered malls, underground structures and windowless facilities, all means of egress that are smoke protected, all MOBI houses, and all other buildings with an area of at least 1,115 square meters. Now, the design, installation, operation, or testing of this smoke control system should be in accordance with the Philippine Mechanical Code or the PME Code, NFPA 92 or the standard for smoke control system, NFPA 204, the standard for smoke and heat venting. Also, I'd like to emphasize for healthcare occupancies or hospitals, we now allow that the emergency rooms, operating rooms, intensive care units, delivery rooms, and other similar facilities may now be located up to 5th floor. Originally, in the old IRR, we limit the location of these facilities in the ground floor. However, because of several requests and appeal from the stakeholders, we now allow it up to the 5th floor. However, if you're going to locate it on the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor, or 5th floor, you have to provide a ramp for the use for emergency purposes. No, so again, the general rule is still it should be in the ground floor. However, if for any reason you cannot use the ground floor as the location of these facilities, you may locate it up to the 5th floor or up to the first level basement, provided that you provide a ramp or a horizontal exit. This ramp or horizontal exit must be fully enclosed in a 2-hour fire rating enclosure. For hotworks operations, like welding, cutting, and other hotworks operations, please be reminded of the hotworks clearance requirement under Section 10.4.17.1. If you recall, this is one of the issues that we raised during the Kentex fire incident for failure of the establishment of the operator or the operator to secure the hotworks clearance prior to the welding operation, which caused the fire in that facility, in that factory. So for business establishment requiring almost daily repair or maintenance operation due to its nature or business or operations, you may secure your hotworks clearance annually. And also, for construction with project duration exceeding 1 year, the validity of your hotworks clearance is annual. Now, for constructions or renovations that are less than 1 year, then it should be on a per project duration basis. Let us now go to part 4 of my lecture, which is the fees, charges, and fines. Let us first talk about the fire safety inspection fee. This is the fee that you pay to the Bureau of Fire Protection when you are securing the fire safety inspection certificate, either for the certificate of occupancy or for business permit. So originally, this is 10% of all fees charged by the local government unit or PESA or any other government agencies that require our fire safety inspection certificate. Because of this amendment, we have raised it to 15%. So from 10% to 15% of all fees charged. So there is an increase of 5%. For storage clearance fee, this is for the storage of flammable and combustible materials. This is issued when you store flammable and combustible materials or liquid in your premises, and this is based on the storage capacities. An example would be for calcium carbide, where you have the storage capacity and the annual fees on the right portion of the table. And also, we also require the securing of the installation clearance, and for that, you will pay the installation clearance fee. This is for the installation of gas, flammable and combustible liquid systems, installation of equipment, utilities and facilities, and installation of fire protection and warning systems. So as you can see in the table, there are equivalent rates based on the kind of the installation clearance that you're going to apply. So for gases, this is 280 pesos for those that are exceeding 454 liters capacity, and for flammable and combustible liquids in above ground and underground tanks, it is 1,049. Now for equipment, utilities, and facilities, this is 0.10% of the verified estimated value of equipment or utility to be installed. Okay. Now for conveyance clearance, this is for the issuance of clearance to vehicles transporting any explosives, flammable liquids, and combustible materials over streets, water, or through pipelines, or even to load and unload such explosives, flammable liquids, or combustible materials in or from any vessel, boat, craft, or railway. So an example would be for cargo truck, motor vehicle, tank truck, tank trailer, and tank semi-trailer carrying flammable or combustible liquids. For the first 2,000 liters, you have to pay 1,748. Now, for every additional 400 liters or fractions thereof, you have to pay an additional 70 pesos. And for other kinds of flammable or combustible materials, there are other table in the fire code where you can consult to determine the rate. Now, for other fees, there are other activities or even the securing of documents, as well as other functions or activities that BFP that you usually pay. No? Example, in the conduct of fire drill, you have to pay 1,000 pesos. If you're going to appeal from the decision of the local fire marshal to higher authorities, you have to pay an appeal fee. So these are the example of other fees. No? And then for administrative fines, these are the penalties that you incur for failure to secure, say for example, the required clearances. An example of which is your failure under letter C is your failure to secure a fire safety evaluation clearance prior to the construction of the building, which is penalized by 37,500 on the first offense and 50,000 pesos on the second offense, and on the third offense you will be closed. Okay, and then another very important is on number 9. This is failure to comply within the period specified in the affidavit of undertaking, because you usually promise to comply within an extended period and you execute an affidavit of undertaking, but sometimes you fail to comply with the promised date, and so you will be penalized by 37,500 to 50,000 pesos depending on how many times you fail to comply with your promise to comply with the fire safety requirements. That ends my lecture for today. Good afternoon, good morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Fire Superintendent Lunas, and to our esteemed resource persons for the vital information you have shared. For our open forum, may we now call on our moderator for the session, the Executive Director of the Occupational Safety and Health Center, Engineer Noel C. Binag.
To our very insightful resource speakers, this question is now directed to Fire Superintendent John Lunas. The question that comes from an anonymous attendee. Question is the Bureau of Fire the only entity that is authorized to conduct training for fire brigade and fire safety practitioner?
No, sir. Under the law, the PFP can enter into a memorandum of agreement with other entities for the conduct of those trainings. However, the training shall be under the full supervision and control still of the Bureau of Fire Protection. So professional groups may conduct these trainings, even other private entities may conduct this training, as long as they have an existing memorandum of agreement with BFP and the trainings are being supervised by the BFP.
Again, another question coming from Ms. Lisa Quinto via Zoom. What is the ideal head count of a fire brigade, and how can we determine the minimum head count required for our facility?
Well, there is no particular rule or guideline as to how many members of the fire brigade you should have in your fire brigade. That would depend on the operation or how big is your facility or establishment. No, small establishment, of course, would need basic fire brigade organizations, and complicated structures and big buildings would have also complicated and complete fire brigade structure. So wala po kaming minamandate kung ilan ba talagang tao ang nandyan, as long as you determine kung ano po yung necessities ng inyong opisina, ng inyong establishment, and then you propose that to the BFP, and that will be approved by the fire marshal having jurisdiction.
And another one, again, coming from an anonymous attendee for our speaker 4. Our building engineering cannot provide emergency programs given that we are leasing a part of their building. May I ask if there are violations to appeal to the building administrator?
That would actually depend on the agreements in the lease contract. Some lease contract would say that compliance with government regulations as far as the requirements is given to the lessee. Sometimes it is with the lessor. So dun po yung tinitingnan namin kung sino yung may responsibility for compliance. However, generally, compliances must be made by the building owner.
Once again, we would like to express our warmest and most sincere appreciation to all of our Plenary One Resource speakers for gracing the 17th National Occupational Safety and Health Congress. Your discussions and presentations were very informative and enlightening. We thank you for gracing our 17th NOSH Congress and imparting to us knowledge and your expertise. Indeed, this is a worthwhile experience. You all have helped us learn and appreciate the innovations of the occupational safety and health governance. Maraming salamat po.
Once again, we would like to thank our resource persons, moderator, and the participants for a very productive discussion. We will